without further ado, I want to introduce Kimberly Green, Director of ATL, to talk about this panel on capstone courses.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Kimberly Green, Director of the Office of Assessment of Teaching and Learning. Kind of a mouthful. This faculty-led panel on capstones and capstone assignments is a follow-up to a workshop we did here last summer, a 2-day workshop with Dr. Pat Hitchings that focused looking at capstone assignments, looking at integrative learning, and other principles of assignment design that are particularly important in the complex, culminating experience kinds of assignments that WSU capstone courses in the major and or U4 tend to offer. So these 4 faculty were all part of that redesign project where they came together and looked at these principles and then revised their assignments in a number of different ways. So I'm really thrilled to have them here to share with us. I'm going to pass the microphone, the talking stick, over to Nancy Palmer-Kim, who's a Senior Assessment Specialist here.
Okay. All right. I just want to very briefly introduce the presenters in order of their. I want to introduce the presenters in order of presentation very briefly so that they have all the time they need. We hope. The first is Michael Allen, who is a Senior Instructor of Astronomy in the Physics and Astronomy program in the College of Arts and Sciences. I am told by someone in the know that he has a passion for curling and is proud to have once been poked in the stomach by the eminent astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I'm quite impressed. Second in order is Theresa Jordan, who is an Associate Clinical Professor of History and Coordinator of the History Social Science Teacher Ed program, as well as being in charge of undergraduate assessment in the History program, which is located in the College of Arts and Sciences. Samantha Gizerian is Clinical Assistant Professor in the Department of Integrative Physiology and Neuroscience in the College of Veterinary Medicine, where she also serves as an undergraduate advisor. She is a member of the WSU President's Teaching Academy and the College of Veterinary Medicine Teaching Academy. And then finally, Desmond Layne is Professor of Pomology, which is fruit, I learned, and Director of 2 interdisciplinary programs, Integrated Plant Sciences and Agricultural and Food Systems in the College of Agricultural, Human, and Natural Resources Sciences. So, Michael?
All right, very good. Thank you for that nice introduction. We have 10 minutes, is that right? And was there a handout? Was there a handout? Yes. Oh, good, perfect, thank you. All right then, so the capstone that I teach is an astrobiology capstone, and there is no major in astrobiology here. So my capstone, I think, is becoming somewhat unique in that it's not required by any major, but it is relevant to anyone of a number of different majors in the university. So I was inspired to approach the class the way that I did, using small projects and using teams. I was inspired by a workshop I went, actually in College of Veterinary Medicine a few years ago, where someone came to speak from University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and he's doing this with his senior genetics class. And I was so impressed by the level of work he was getting out of his students that I decided I was going to just jump in with both feet. So the students have 3 projects. They work in groups of about 5. Each project is due after 5 weeks. They're turning in anywhere between 10 and 20 page projects. The sort of year-long process that I went through in inventing the course involved a lot of reading of anywhere between sort of theory and practice in other people who are working on sort of project-based learning, and learned a number of things that I sort of tried out. And so one thing that was emphasized by everything I read is how you put together student teams. And I spent a lot of work on that. It's crucial in this course that all the students get caught up in the astrobiology literature. And so as a result, in setting up the teams, so here's an example. Before the course begins, the students will fill out a little questionnaire where they self-identify in several different skills, one of which is searching the literature. And I will put together teams of students where some of the students are very practiced at searching the literature and some students are not very practiced, in the hope that everybody can, come up to some sort of standard level. And that, I think it works okay. I think I've seen some gains in that area over the course of 15 weeks. The other thing was choosing the nature of the projects. And the projects all build on each other. So by the time they're finishing their third project, they can refer to the knowledge they've used in their first two projects. And so the very first project is they have to evaluate the number of currently active communicating civilizations in the Milky Way. And to come up with a number for that, they have to know things about how many stars are there in the Milky Way? Are we going to assume all life is on planets? How many of those planets have a solvent on the surface? That type of thing. And once they've learned all that about stellar and planetary astronomy, they can apply that in our own solar system to the second project, which is designing a lander for Mars to detect a sign of life, It's called the Viking 3 project because Viking 1 and Viking 2 already landed on Mars, already performed their experiments, and already have their full data, and that was in 75, 76. So here we are a quarter century later, nearly half a century later now. And the students are asked to design the follow-up experiment. Now that they have some preliminary results, what's their next experiment? So you can see biochemistry starting to work its way into this particular project. And then the third project is detecting life on a planet that we can't see, a planet surrounding or orbiting another star. So again, from the first project, they would have ideas, how many planets there are, what their target list might look like. From the second project, they have an idea of what biosignatures are. And now they can apply that to what I think is the most difficult project, the third one, actually trying to find a biosignature on this, on this exoplanet, this exoplanetary system. The assignment, so they have 5 weeks, and each week they have an assignment that's due. And so in that assignment, the assignments are scaffolded in such a way that, the fifth assignment is the final report that they hand in. So the fourth assignment would be the outline and maybe an opening paragraph for that assignment, for that final report. The assignment before that one, the third one, would be settling on, lists of biosignatures or, having a bibliography finished, that type of thing. So as a result, I do want them, constantly writing and reading and constantly adding to their report. The students actually find this to be pretty beneficial. They all use, something like Google Docs or Google Drive, I guess it's called now. They're constantly reading each other's work, editing each other's work, adding their own paragraphs. They are specifically required to author every paragraph. So I can go in and I can see who's been writing what. And the students can see who's been writing what. The students also have a self-evaluation due every week. The self-evaluation is where they indicate what type of effort they're putting in. They feel as though they had a good week or a bad week. They also evaluate their peers. They have a number of points they can distribute. So for example, if they're distributing 100 points and there are 5 students in the group, then the average is 20 points per week. But if someone has done a little more work, they can assign that person 25 points, or maybe a little less work, 19 points. To be honest with you, I'm not actually very satisfied with this particular system. The students just tend to give everybody 20 points, whether or not the person's doing the work or not. And often it's up to, to me to find out, who's really doing the work. And so now comes the nuts and bolts of what I actually do on a week-by-week basis. Half or more of the in-class time is devoted to the students working on their laptops or reading through the papers that they've found. I will visit each group individually. I will take attendance. I will look them in the eye. I will say, what are you doing this week? What have you done this week? What are you stuck on? What do you anticipate? What kind of questions do you have for me? If I get the same responses from every group in the class, then I know I got to teach a little mini lecture. I say, okay, stop. Everybody has the same question. Let's actually get through this. And let's understand something about the lifetime of a star, or what does it mean to say water is a liquid, or something that's crucial and in common. And so that changes. I've taught the course this way 2 semesters, and those those questions have changed over 2 semesters. And I think that probably depends on the spectrum of people I have in the class. One time I taught the course, of the 20 students, 5 were physics majors. Another time I taught the course, I didn't have those physics majors. And so as a result, I think the complexion of the students really strongly informs what the students know and what they don't know in their collective knowledge. So that's what I do on a day-by-day basis, or on a sort of a basis of class by class, They're also required to log their time out of class, how much time they're spending, and the students are required to submit to me what their meeting dates are, what their meeting locations are, who comes to those. Do you have everybody's phone number? Do you have everybody's email? They're asked questions like, if you email someone, does that person respond in a timely fashion or not? In that pre-course questionnaire that I hand out, one thing I do have in that questionnaire is, how often are you free? And I try and make it so that the groups have students that can actually all meet at the same time. So I've come back to that twice now, haven't I, how to form groups. There's a pretty extensive literature, and much of it is from other disciplines, not the physical sciences. It's from medicine or law or engineering especially, where group work has got this long history. And I've tried to read that to a certain extent and understand, what are some of the commonalities. And some of the things that I do see is that pre-course questionnaire and forming those groups so that the groups are effective is really crucial to the success of using a project-based, project-driven, I should say, team-based learning. And that's really where I've spent a considerable amount of time, is trying to find, some algorithm so I can just, put students' names in and then grind out a solution. I haven't found the algorithm yet. I find myself, this is going to sound silly, I actually find myself taking the class list, actually cutting it up with scissors and putting people in little piles and moving the piles around. And I say, I got 3 physics majors here. I can't have that. I got to move them around, or oops, I have 2 people here who both work in the evenings. I can't have them in the same, in the same group, that type of thing. So anyways, that's where I spent a lot of my time. The feedback, I have 3 graders. I'm one of the graders, and the other 2 are graduate students. To try and preserve what some people would say is the thin veneer of objectivity, I rely on my student graders very heavily. And I will nudge their grades up or down if there's something they don't see. But often the student graders will find something that I don't see. And when they see that, then I've got to go back in and make some sort of correction. Like, for example, one of the student graders will say, oh, this person authored 250 words. Everybody else is over 1,000. Did you know that? Well, maybe I didn't catch that the first time, Or a student grader will say, well, look at this. This person wrote one thing. This person contradicted it in a later paragraph. So some things that can be difficult to see when you're working with the students day by day, my graders will see. My graders are required to attend the end of every 5th week when the students give a little 5-minute talk and present a poster, and that goes into the grading. So overall, I would say the students are getting very good at searching the literature. They're figuring out how to present posters. I actually had one group last year actually go to Circa with their poster, which I thought was pretty cool. I think in terms of actually sharing the knowledge, I'm not entirely sure that that's working as well as I want. I did have a comm major who went into science writing as part of this course, and I have had physics majors who doesn't seem like they've learned a whole lot at the same time. So anyway, so that's sort of a very rough overview of what it is that I've done.
All right, Samantha, if you would not mind pulling up my assignments page. The course I teach is World Geography and Historical Perspective. And it's, of course, it's a history course. It pulls in people from history, from environmental science, sometimes from forestry. It's required by people who are going to go into education as it fulfills a geography requirement. And I really enjoy teaching this course. It's a lot of fun to teach. And what I try to do with it is address the requirements of depth and breadth. We're supposed to require depth and breadth in a capstone course. And I also see it as an opportunity for students to demonstrate their competencies, their skills, their specialty in whatever discipline they have majored in, because we're supposed to be pulling across the disciplines. So this course, you can see there, actually that's my old one. And so we were missing the most current one, Sam. There's another one in there which is more current. This is still useful because you see that there's the place names, there's the longitude.
Got it saved, actually.
Yeah, there's the metageography, which I've changed, which is still, so we're still, I lost my glasses, so sorry about this. The course, what this course does is give students a chance to experiment, to reach in different directions. The books that I'm currently using, I'm still using Organic Machine, I'm using Native River, and both of these are about the Columbia River, but they're very different perspectives on the Columbia River. So this is where I'm asking students to stretch and go into the Native American perspective and also into the, I'll call them the white settlers perspective. And it also gives them a chance to stretch across the disciplines because they can use biology, they can use science, they can use sociology, they can use anthropology. All the different disciplines can be pulled into this topic. We work pretty heavily with collapse, and if we're looking at making learning relevant in students' lives, this is a book which really is asking them to take a good look at using history to evaluate the present. And so to look at what happened with the Mayans or the Easter Island, and then compare it to what's happening in modern societies like China and of course the United States. Looking at the state of Montana as an example, what's happened in Montana. So this too gives students a chance to stretch across the disciplines, to demonstrate their expertise. And in all of the topics, if we go to some of the rubrics, Sam, pull up one of the rubrics. Each assignment has its own specific rubric tailored to that assignment. And they have all of this information at the beginning of the course. They have all the assignments, they have the rubrics, they know where they're going. They know what my expectations are. And in each of the rubrics, yeah, this is for the paper. And let's go to the place names. They're not identical, but they carry many of the same ideas. So evidence-based, argument-based, looking at what did you use for sources. So these things go stretch across the course, but each rubric is tailored for each individual assignment. So what I'm trying to do is build your level of expertise across the course. Allow them to have a wide selection of options and hopefully find a topic which interests them. The book that we start with, and they have to read the whole thing, is Why Geography Matters, which is a bit of a combination of giving them a chance to explore the methods of geography, and then stretch into the kind of social analysis of what are we doing and why. So we read the whole thing. We read all of this. We use this as a source. I don't have all my books here. We read some of this, but not all of it, because Diamond uses many examples which really are replicating the same lesson. So I don't think we have to read every single example of a collapse to get the idea. And then we also use this, which is another way of organizing evidence. And this allows them, again, another chance to explore a different way of organizing information and making a point. And one of the things I want them to be aware of is that so often when students look at a map, they think of it as fact. And a map is an organization of information. Someone made choices about what type of map to use, about the focus of the map, about the organization, about the key, about the colors, about the images, which is very, very clear if you're looking at a map of the British Empire, but maybe not so clear if you're looking at a modern map, because maybe the bias has been more disguised. It's not so transparent. So this also gives another opportunity to be, I will say, assessing the presentation of information, and also gives them a model of how they can organize information themselves. So if we ever go to, let's see, we did the paper with the place names. Let's go to the longitude. So throughout the course, they've got what I think of as support. They have the support of knowing what the assignments are, of having the rubrics in advance. They can plan ahead. They have their options as far as paper topics. They can write their final paper. It can either be on collapse, can be organic machine, and can also be on Orientalism, Said's Orientalism, which I didn't bring here, which is looking at the definition of East and West in terms of societies making those particular qualifications. So they've got a wide range of topics. The assignments begin at the lower rate, 100 level, and by the time of the end of the semester, we're at 250 points. So we move from 100, 100, 150, 200, 250. So the stakes raise over the course of the semester, but they have lots of time to work on improvement. And the rubrics are consistent in the way they're organized, so I'm not changing the parameters on them as we go along. So I'm going to leave it at that, and if you would like to look more at the rubrics or look more deeply in the assignments, I'm happy to do that with you, but I'd like to give the other panelists a chance to talk more about their courses, and I'll leave it at that.
Samantha, let me say that questions we were reserving for the end.
So good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to follow up on a theme that Michael touched on a little bit earlier, which is practice with feedback. And this actually comes from assessment of our students across the last several years and having them struggle with this culminating project that we've been doing in our program since before it was required as a capstone. And so we have several years of data from our students that we've been working on in order to try and improve what we're doing with them. So basically what it comes down to is that as we started to assess these projects, we realized that our students were struggling. And we were really confused because we thought that this is something that senior level neuroscience students should be able to do if they're going to go on to a professional career in a science related field, whether that's research or medicine or something entirely different. We were making two mistakes. The first is that we were assuming that students had developed skills that they were in fact lacking. Oh, we do that. Well, we do that. That doesn't mean our students do that. There's a lot of expert blind spot here in our thinking. And what we realized is that exposure to skills and concepts, yes, they see scientific literature, yes, they see posters hanging in the hall. The ones that work in research labs may even have worked with a graduate student who's preparing a poster or a talk, but that doesn't mean they're developing those skills for themselves just because they're hanging around with it. And we were also asking our students to use these new skills without practice. Well, you've seen somebody do that, you go do that. And it turns out that seems to be a very common model in science. Oh, write an abstract. You're giving a presentation next week. A what? And so students struggle to learn to do these things efficiently. And so we wanted to make sure there was a place in our curriculum where students were explicitly taught how to do these things and given a chance to practice. And it seemed like at sort of the core, what they were missing were skills in the analysis and synthesis of information across levels. We do a great job teaching students how to analyze data and synthesize information within each class. I think that's true in every discipline. Getting the material connected from class to class to class across the discipline is more of a challenge because students tend to think, and that's a very broad generalization, but when I speak with students, they tell me they tend to think of the material as associated with a particular class and don't really think about, oh, this is the same material I learned in that other class. So here we are trying to make that explicit for them. And then also just common scientific communication skills. One of the things that I discovered about WSU is that as a science major, you actually don't have to take a communications class for oral communication. You can take 2 writing classes here at WSU. You don't ever have to stand in front of people. So even though many of our students are going to be asked to do this for the rest of their life and whatever their career is, they've never had any training. So we wanted to make sure that was a part of our curriculum as well. So the upshot is that now our students work across the semester in a stepwise fashion, building from an initial concept to a final product, building skills along the way, as well as getting feedback and practice. And I'll step you through that. So the scaffold that we use in our class is that a student comes up with a research concept. And if they're working in a research lab, fantastic, they can work in their lab. If they are not a student who's interested in working in a research lab, we allow them to do a library project. So they just have to come up with an idea. Then they work with a mentor to develop what we call our research proposal. And it's just a 1-page sheet where they tell me what they want to write about for their final project and why that's important in the greater scheme of things. Sure, that's an interesting question, but why would someone fund you to do it? Then they move on and they use that as the basis for research, whether that's, again, lab or library research, and they begin to describe that in an abstract. And writing an abstract is a skill that oftentimes we assume that our students know. But there's actually a rhyme and a reason to writing an abstract. Many of us who write abstracts as part of our scholarship probably learned from our mentor handing us an abstract and saying, it's something like this. We actually go through it explicitly with our students and talk about what to include, what not to include, different forms of abstracts as they go forward. Then they actually peer edit each other's abstracts. I take all the identifying information off and we pass them around, and students have the opportunity to just scribble all over and make constructive criticism. And it actually gives them a good chance to practice thinking critically about someone else's writing and not just say, oh, this is good. Because I tell them if I see, oh, this is good, that group is not getting points. So then once they have an abstract, then what they do is they expand on that abstract to include all the relevant concepts and ideas, and I make them actually go through the writing process. So they have to put together an outline. The 2 forms of scientific communication, as you'll see, that we require in our class for our capstone project are a poster and an oral presentation. And because they're not actually writing a document, I think having an outline is really critical to them in terms of structuring their arguments. And we talk a lot about structuring arguments in this class because, as it turns out, most of them have never done that in the context of their scientific work. They've been taught to write papers in English 101, and they're making arguments based on literature or history, but it's a very different animal altogether to be making a scientific argument based on data, and they've never really been asked to do that, and they're seniors. So we really talk about how one goes about doing that, and how to say, well, what is this paragraph really for, as we build our text. Then they take that outline and turn it into a full scientific poster. Those of you who were at Circa yesterday actually saw some of these posters potentially. So they include specific details, graphical representations, and have a poster that they present. And actually our poster session is coming up. We do it on Mom's Weekend so that their families can come. We hand out scholarships and we do honor cords and things like that. So it's a real incentive for them to do very well. And also before they do the poster, they actually have a chance to show off their poster to their colleagues, and we do, instead of an anonymous peer feedback session, they actually have to stand up front and defend their poster from constructive criticism from the class. And that actually is a really great session because people contribute everything from, I don't like that color combination, to I think you've got too much in your conclusions, how can you parse that down? So it's actually a really good exercise for them. And then from the poster, they then have to turn that into a 10-minute oral presentation. So again, a completely different kind of communication beast. Where instead of with the poster, they can almost throw anything they want on the poster and put too much information out there. Now with a 10-minute time limit, which I'm gonna probably run over here shortly, with a 10-minute time limit, they're really forced to focus on what's the most important thing I need to get across? How can I tell this complete story in 10 minutes? So as we go through, each additional step adds more detail or more new skills, gives practice to new skills. in the body of work, and then each additional step is also an opportunity to revise their evidence and the argument that they're building to make a stronger, more effective argument for or against their hypothesis. So what we're really going for, and this is what we're seeing so far, building their skills. So general communication skills, recognition of audience tone and purpose for each of their outputs, providing objective feedback. How do you give constructive criticism in a positive way without saying, oh, that sucks? Because that's pretty much where they start at the beginning of the semester. And what are effective communication techniques for various audiences? One of the things that we do in this class that's completely unrelated to the project is they have to present a science exhibit for 5th graders. So very, very different than showing off a poster at Circa or presenting your poster to faculty and family and friends on Mom's Weekend. And then specifically in the realm of scientific communication, they learn about abstract writing, synthesis and analysis of evidence, how to effectively use graphs and tables, and how to apply the writing process to scientific inquiry. You know, we teach them how to do the scientific method. Well, how do we apply the writing process to that as well? And then how do they explain the connections between different kinds of information and information from different sources? We think it's working, so this is actually my last slide, so I will finish on time. So the blue bars are scores for the oral presentation in 2015 before we changed to this scaffolded practice with feedback model, and where they actually they sort of started from scratch. They didn't get as much feedback. They didn't have a research mentor assigned to them. 2016, they had a research mentor assigned to them, and we really started to focus on feedback with their practices. You can see, still have lower scores, but we had more students with higher scores. So stay tuned. And with that, those are all neuro students, I should add, yes. So all the students in my capstone are neuroscience seniors, whether they're graduating in May or graduating in December.
Go ahead. So I have a handout. Okay. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes about the capstone that we have in the AFS program, which is an interdisciplinary program at WSU. It's in our College of Agriculture. And there are 5 different student majors that are part of this interdisciplinary program. And they're all required to take this capstone course to graduate. So they either take it as a senior, or in some cases, they're admitted to take it as a junior. And we prefer them not to take it as a junior, but they do if they're an ag education major, because this course is offered in the fall, or excuse me, in the spring, and that's when they have to do their teaching as seniors off campus. So that's how we accommodate them. And so on the handout, I identify some of the key things about this course and what might make it different from other capstone courses that we have. What's kind of unique about it is that the students participate in a team-based project with an industry partner for the entire duration of the class. And that's really the key critical element of the course, is that partnership with industry. And the industry partner comes to the class with a specific problem that they don't have the time to invest in to solve. They don't know what the answer is, and they want to know what a bunch of bright students will figure out for them. We arrange all of this before the semester starts. So I already have pre-arranged who the industry partners are. We've determined a project that the students can work on. So all that groundwork is laid before the course starts. And then in the first, in the first week of class, we have a questionnaire that the students fill out so that we can determine kind of the diversity that we have in class. And diversity in terms of their major. We ask them what their GPA is. We have diversity in terms of gender. We have them do an online personality profile, which will identify them as primarily extroverted or introverted, and some aspects about their personality. And then we pull all of that together into a big matrix and try and assemble the teams in such a way that they are absolutely as diverse as possible. And so the students know coming into this that the instructor will determine how their teams will be composed. And we actually asked students about this a year ago if they cared whether or not we assembled the teams or they assembled the teams by themselves, and they they felt like having the diversity of all the different majors on a particular team made their team stronger for the projects that they were going to be doing, and they liked it, so we decided we would go with that, and that's the way we did it this year. So we do have very diverse teams, which is great. The industry partners, excuse me, are either corporations or cooperatives that work in the agricultural industry. And many of the partners that we have actually are strongly affiliated with WSU and with our college. They may be give scholarships, they may fund internships, they may be working directly with other students in different ways. They hire our graduates oftentimes. So they have a vested interest in the college, in these projects. They understand the purpose of these projects, and some of the partners have done this for a couple of years running. And so it's really a great experience for both the students and for the partners to be able to work together throughout the course of a semester. And what's challenging for the students is that these are open-ended problems. There's not an easy solution to figure out. And they have to do research, they have to work with their partner, they have to maybe do surveys, maybe they have to call people, they have to do independent research, and work with their partner to develop a project management plan that gets revised over the course of the semester. And every week, these teams report back to the class on the progress they're making. And they do this just with a very short, we do it on Thursday mornings, or Thursday afternoons, it's a minute or less. They update us on the minutes of their most recent team meeting. And then every 2 weeks, they have to give us a little bit more meat, talking about where they're at on their project, and identify some specific things about when they interacted with their industry partner and how that meeting went with their partner. How did it go? What would you change? What would you do differently? And so we're teaching them things like, planning for meetings, preparing for meetings, conducting meetings, establishing minutes from meetings, reporting back on those minutes, and engaging with their partner throughout the course. And then as they develop their initial project management plan, as they get partway into the semester and they've learned some things and they've realized the original thoughts they had maybe aren't going to work, or they need to tweak something, or their partner said, well, let's not do that anymore, let's focus on this. They have to make adjustments along the way, and then they have to show us how they've made those adjustments to their project management plan. And the other thing is they have to identify who's going to do what. So each member of the team has to have a specific role. One of the things that we didn't do last year that we changed, that we're doing now in the class this semester, is we asked each team to elect from within their team a project manager. And that's been very helpful, because when you have an industry partner who has a full-time job and they're very busy, they don't need to be getting 6 emails from 6 different people. They need one conduit who represents the team, who communicates with them independently from when they actually meet face-to-face. And this has been a helpful addition. And the team is the one who chooses who that person is going to be. And then they bear certain responsibilities for leadership for that team. And they will come to talk to us on behalf of the team if there's an issue with their partner, or if there's an issue in the team where students are having some trouble working together. And then they're enhancing their own leadership skills in that respect. They have to prepare a comprehensive report that is presented to their partner and to the instructor at the end of the semester. They also have to do an oral presentation before the industry partners at the end of the semester. And this is a big chunk of their work in terms of their grade. We encourage them to use modern tools to communicate with their industry partners, because their partners are located all over the state. So they'll do teleconferencing, they'll do Zoom or Skype, they may do face-to-face meetings. They're encouraged to go and actually visit their industry partner at the location the partner has their place of business. And we actually have a small grant that can cover their travel to do that. So they just get a motor pool vehicle, they travel together, they go to visit with their partner, and then they have to report back. Some students today are actually going to be reporting back on the meeting they had with their partner this past Saturday. We invite in guest speakers from industry, and they speak on topics, everything from project management to sales to developing your personal brand. We have a panel of recent graduates that come in and talk about what life is like in the real world now that they are working, where they formerly were a student in this program a few years ago, and field questions from the students. We have father-son team that come in and talk about succession planning. And a lot of the students in this class will go back to a family farm. And this is important for them to be thinking ahead about these things and what have others done is particularly helpful. So they're learning professional communication skills. They have to speak in front of the class when they give their minutes updates, when they give their project reports at the end of the semester. They're learning about scientific research. They're doing surveys. They're collecting data, analyzing data. They're interacting with someone other than a professor to get feedback. They're accountable to someone other than a professor to get feedback. And they're learning that people's time is precious. And when you're part of a team or you're working with industry, you have to work with people that may be above you and understand that they're not necessarily going to respond just like that every time you have a question. And so they've had to learn that if they're engaging their partner about something, that they need to give them sufficient time to get the response back before they have to turn something in. And not just send them an email at 8 o'clock in the morning and say, we got this assignment due this afternoon, can you give us some feedback? So that's another part that they're learning. And it's been a challenging class. I team taught it last year for the first time. 1 minute, yeah. And we did a focus group at the end of the semester to get feedback from the students on what they liked and what they didn't like and what we could do to improve it. We made several pretty significant adjustments from last year to this year. The most important was the amount of time that we're giving students to work as their teams in class. And we've substantially increased that. And I think that's been to the benefit of the projects and to the teams. So I'll stop right there. And hopefully we have some questions. Yeah.
Thank you to all four of you. This was
Sure.
just fascinating.
Well, let me say that all four of the presenters attended the workshop on capstone assignment design last spring, and this year we'll be offering a one-day version of that workshop. The flyers are available. That will be May 12th. The flyers are available on the table as you leave. We'll also be offering a half-day workshop on something called transparent assignment design to help faculty think about how to make their assignments more transparent, which means more accessible to students. There's been a lot of great work on how important transparency is in assignment design. And it also helps you it helps promote better student work, and it does help improve the grading process. And having a long background as a professor before I came here, shortening the grading process should be a nice carrot. But that workshop will be on the 16th. Okay. Questions?
Yeah.
Yes, I'd be curious to have each presenter talk about what you've learned and how it would translate to a master's capstone versus undergraduate, if anything different.
Well, I would say the importance of how to work in a team, how to realize that when you say you're going to do something, that's a contract right there, and you've got to live up to it. So I would say a lot of how to deal with people in a close-knit group is probably what I would see as a highly transferable skill and something I would work on explicitly.
Yeah, I think for our students, one of the important things for us is making sure that they meet the goals that we have set out for them at the senior level, and I think that's something that's immediately translatable to a master's program. What are the goals for your master's students? Do the assignments you're giving them and the feedback and practice you're giving them along the way help them reach that level of mastery that you want at their level of education?
You want to add anything?
For a master's in history, what they would really need, what we would have to focus on would be analytical thinking and the quality of their research and finding those good sources. So it's not so much a group emphasis, though I do have a group project in this course, and I do work on the dynamics of interpersonal dynamics. For work on a master's degree in history, we are no longer focusing on group work. We would really be looking at their own intellectual, analytical capabilities.
Yeah, and I'd say for our class, it's absolutely targeted for seniors that are leaving, going to work, not going to grad school. So it's a completely different emphasis. And when I think about master's students, I think about learning how to be a scientist and how to do research, and it's very much more focused on the individual, building that base. But I think, for example, what we're doing, the whole teamwork piece is critical no matter where you're at in your educational continuum from undergrad through graduate school. So any way you can build teamwork skills and give people opportunities perhaps to lead teams. So maybe you've got a graduate student that's leading a team of undergraduates that are doing a research project or something like that. That could possibly be where they're accountable to the graduate student advisor, maybe. I don't know. This is a thought.
Okay, we have a question from online, and then we'll go to Karen.
Okay, this is a question from one of our online participants to Dr. Layne. They wanted to know, do you teach your students about identifying the need, creating a problem statement, identifying stakeholders, selecting a system concept, etc., basic systems engineering approaches?
So actually, we come to the students with a project that has already been somewhat defined. So the industry partner has already communicated with me and interacted with me about an idea that they have, and we decide that that's what we're going to go with. So we present that, but actually what we do is the first, probably within the second and third week of the course, all of the industry partners over the course of several class periods come to campus and give a lecture, well, part of a lecture about their project, and they actually meet with their team that in the first couple of weeks of class to sit down and talk about the nuts and bolts of what they're doing. But the project itself is initiated by the industry partner and what needs they have. And then the students are assigned to that project to work with that partner. And we purposely did not allow the students to choose which partner they worked with, because we have certain projects that are very closely related to some of the majors that the students are in. And for example, we have Moscow Food Cooperative to be an industry partner, and they focus on organics. And we have an organic major that's part of our AFS program. And we didn't want all of our organic students to be working with Moscow Food Co-op. We wanted a diversity of students working with Moscow Food Co-op so that they could get the benefit from these other majors. And we wanted our organic our students to be distributed among the teams so that they could have that perspective to share with those specific projects. So we are coming to the students with a project already pretty well defined, but they have to figure out, well, how do we arrive at an answer? And it's a very open-ended question that requires all of their respective skill sets to try and come up with an answer. Okay.
Thanks. My question's for Sam about your mentors. Who are they? Graduate students? What is the mentor process in that course? And
the mentor process for our course is that when students certify as a neuroscience major, because the class is required for their graduation, both as their capstone and also as a neuroscience major requirement. One of the things we do is we ask them about the research that they're doing. Are you working in a lab? Do you have a research mentor? If not, what are the kinds of things you'd be interested in? And then if they're working with a research mentor in the lab, whether that's actually in neuroscience or not, that person is the mentor for their project. Because why should I make them do extra work if they're already working on a project, whether it's botany or psychology? We don't really care. We just want to see them be able to make those kinds of analytical conclusions and the other skills that we're building, it can be anything as long as it's science or social science. So if they're doing research, that's their mentor. If they're not doing research, we go through and I try to match them with a faculty member in neuroscience, someone who's in our department. And then they can get credit for meeting with that mentor across the fall semester. So this class is only offered in the spring, but we can give them credit for meeting with that mentor in the fall and developing that project. And then they can go back to that mentor in the spring when they're actually in the class working on the poster, the oral presentation, all of those pieces, and have the mentor vet their project, the same as if they were working in that person's research lab. So they have access to that professional opinion as well as their peers.
So it is 1 o'clock. I really want to thank the presenters, Theresa, Des, Sam, and Mike, all for being here, for Nancy and Kimberly to put the program together. So can we give them a round of applause? Thank you very much. I want to remind you all about our spring Academic Technology Forum, which is April 5th. It's pretty much the same kind of faculty leading, talking about the way they're using technology to enhance teaching and learning. So you can look on the e-learning website for that Spring Technology Forum, and thank you for being here.